welcome to this week's episode of the Evolve CEO podcast. I'm your host, Greg Gillies.
And I'm Tracey Gillies.
And in this week's podcast, we're going to be talking about a topic of intuition versus ego. Now, we have this conversation with our clients and with people all of the time. How do we know? How do we differentiate? How do we tune into intuition versus ego? The ego is very loud, right? The ego wants to control the situation. The ego, as we describe and talk about, is actually the mind, is actually the conversations, the thoughts, the narratives of the mind. And the intuition is much more about feeling. It's coming in through our heart space. It's actually our spiritual guidance that is trying to talk to us. It's interesting that the world that we live in, there is so much information now that people's minds are so busy, so consumed, and so overactive trying to process all of the information that people truly don't know when they are listening to their intuition versus their ego. So it's a very important topic. So I'm going to talk about my take on it. One, before I started doing this really deep inner work, going on a healing journey, starting to open myself up to my spiritual awakening and what that meant, and understanding that we had a soul and we're spiritual and we have this intuition, I was 100% ego. I listened and was guided to by my mind all the time. And it honestly created a roller coaster in my life because I had so many desires, so many limiting beliefs, so much noise, so much pressure, so much roles and responsibilities that I couldn't actually decipher, or I didn't even know how to decipher what was my intuitive path versus my egoic desires, wants and needs, really.
I think a lot of people are confused with the word ego. I think they think that sometimes when we say somebody's egotistical, sorry, I can't even say
egotistical.
That word. Yeah. That, they're being rude. It doesn't reference that at all. It simply reference like the level of the mind. And like I know for myself as well, I was really asleep. And I wasn't even the person that I am today. And I didn't even realize that there was more than my mind. And I didn't realize how much that my mind was controlling everything that I did. And even the person that had been created from that place. And, that place of the mind, it just holds so many fear-based programs. It holds so much lack and so much untruths that it's that journey of coming into more than that and realizing that there's this place that exists that actually holds this beautiful wisdom. I think in this day and age, we're kind of all looking at other people to gain that gauge on our path. And that's the point with these higher places within us and that intuitive response, that it's unique to each one of us. And we can't just follow somebody else's path. It's about creating our own. And the only way to do that is to almost, I don't want to say separate from the mind, because the mind is amazing and the mind is a tool, but I see a lot of people that get really stuck and defined by it and its limitations. So it's almost utilizing these two things together.
Totally. And your point before around being asleep and not even knowing the intuitive side of yourself or the spiritual side of yourself. And you also mentioned around people's reaction or people's first response to when you say ego. So we were kind of brought up to believe that if you were ego driven or egotistical, it was a bad thing. And as you said, it's not true. Everybody has an ego. If you have a mind, you have an ego. And the ego is actually, as you said, designed to serve us. The mind was always designed to be a servant and to serve us and to help us do what we need to do in this life. But how fast the world has become, the amount of information, noise, pressure, even a lot of the fake information that we're constantly inundated with, negative news, negative fake influences, the amount of noise and pressure in the mind, the ego is actually doing its job, but it's hyperactive. It's doing its job because it's trying to help you survive, and it's trying to help you make the right decisions. It can only manage certain amount of information per second, way less than what we're actually consuming. So a lot of people start to believe that their intuitive voice comes to them through their mind. You might get intuitive messages come through in the shape of form of thoughts and so forth. But when the mind is in this state of survival and it's constantly trying to navigate and think its way through life, most of those thoughts that you believe are intuitive are not. They are not intuitive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens with the mind? Like let's talk at a neurological and a scientific level about what is actually happening in the mind of people in this day and age with the amount of noise, pressure, and information they're trying to process.
Oh, it's just too much. I think once upon a time, if you look at all those movies, I know I love them, like Vikings and that kind of era, there was just this free space. You know, we were busy in that, but we also had that balance and we had that kind of space to almost free our mind that a lot of people had intuitive abilities. We've all got this capability to have this because I don't know. I think it's being seen as if it's something separate to us. It's not. It's just like these higher aspects of us that speak in different ways. I also know with intuition, it's different for each person. I know when I first started learning stuff and opening up to intuition, I was thinking I wasn't very intuitive because my gifts were feeling. I felt things intently. That's another way to kind of tune into that place. Some people hear messages, some people might see things, some people might have clear cognizance, which is just knowing. But in looking at another person, I thought I was doing it wrong. And I almost was missing my own cues of what was right for me. So it's almost like it's this relationship with self, and you've got to get to know it within yourself. But people are becoming so overloaded and so bogged down that they are stuck in that. We often talk about it, sympathetic nervous system dominance or deep survival stress state, which means our mind, our brain is holding so much stress. And as Greg said before, the mind's meant to keep us safe. That's its job. And when it's kind of stressed, it kind of just feeds into more and more looking for danger. It literally is just doing its job, but it means there's no space for this higher kind of wisdom to come in. And if you understand what expanding a person's consciousness is about, so, you know, Joe Dispenza will talk about these things. You actually literally have to heal people's brain structures. So this is referencing the work that I do. So I would have to heal people's brain structures enough, take them out of that deep survival stress state so that their brain structures can hold higher vibrational frequency or higher vibrational information, because everything is actually vibrational. And so that is expanding a person's consciousness. But when we're stuck in those states that we become so overconsumed with the external world, with our demands, with our pressures of life, with stress, and things aren't functioning correctly, it's like there's no space for this other place to exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. So you were talking about healing. You were talking about healing neurological structures. You also referenced somebody who's very, very famous, Dr. Joe Dispenza. So how can people start to heal their mind and their neurological structures so that they can get the ego back to a place of being a servant and not a master? And then how do they know what is the intuitive versus the egoic voice? Like what would be the journey or the path or the stages that somebody would need to go on?
Oh, it would be through healing. So we all have something called a soul vibration rate. And again, as I said before, the universal language of the universe is vibration. Like everything is actually vibrational. So like a higher state of being, like love or connectedness, it's like we're kind of vibrating at this higher level. Fear-based things, you know, like guilt or regret, they're like a lower frequency. And we actually all have this unique soul vibration rate. Yes. And as we increase that, which it's done through the healing process, it's done through having this awakening process where we realize that we're more than our mind. And we actually start to take responsibility for everything that's in our life and everything that we've created. So when we go through this process, if I was stuck at the level of my mind, it would be very hard to differentiate between what is actually my mind and what is that higher wisdom, because they're kind of sitting at the same place. But as I go through that process, it's actually called the process of elimination. It's like in my life, I start to question all the things that I am, and I start to go, maybe people said or labeled these things about me. Maybe I took that on from my childhood, from my parents, but that's actually not true. And that's not who I am. And as we kind of clear away more of the untruths, it gets clearer to hear and recognize that higher wisdom that is really who we truly are and what we're here to step into and create. You know, we have a lot of clients that talk about they want to know their passion and purpose because they just feel lacking in themselves. They've created this like success concession kind of plan for themselves and they've walked it, and then they get to the end of it and feel like something's missing. And it's because they're still kind of carrying the weight of their past. They're still carrying, even maybe it might be body, physical stress, neurological stress, all of these things, and a lot of unconscious beliefs that don't match up with the way that they have kind of like just gone through the steps and stages of their life. And it's through that elimination, it's through that healing process that you clear away all these things. Sometimes we kind of talk to our clients, don't we, Greg? It's like, don't be in a rush. Don't be in a rush. You can't just suddenly know your passion and purpose. You have to have kind of walked that path and done the work. It's like uncovering it. It's like a diamond that's just got an all, underneath this bit of coal. You'd kind of chip away at it and it's kind of turned into this beautiful thing, or that diamond sitting there waiting. But it is this path to kind of uncover it.
So that there's a few things in that. So the first one is the process of elimination. Now, people are really bad at doing this because most people, if you look at most people, everybody's got mobile phones, smartphones nowadays. We're not actually living a process of elimination type life to enable us to free ourselves up to be more intuitive. We're actually living a process of accumulation, and people are accumulating so much more knowledge. People will pick up on one thing. So we might reference it's all about healing and increasing your soul vibration rate. So they'll start Googling soul vibration rate, and then they'll go down this massive rabbit hole, and all they're doing is trying to accumulate more information when it's the exact opposite that needs to be done to move towards that. So people are not trusting themselves. People are moving more away from their intuition. People are becoming more disconnected. Is because they believe the mind just needs to keep on gathering more and more and more information. Now, there's a few other things that you touched on, Tracey, that I want to expand on. You spoke about your abilities. So I want to talk about everybody has got abilities. They've just disconnected and shut themselves, or haven't even done what is required to explore them. Then you spoke about awakening, and then you spoke about responsibility. So we have a responsibility in this lifetime to do the work that is necessary to access our abilities so that we can have a spiritual awakening, so that we can then find our passion and purpose. People are doing things around the wrong way. So I want you to talk about, what do people need to take responsibility in so that they can find their true intuitive spiritual abilities and go through a spiritual awakening process that will help them open up and become who they're meant to be. Start with responsibility.
No, I'm not.
Okay, don't.
Even when I talked about consciousness before and expanding consciousness, I said you had to heal brain structures enough to kind of hold this higher elevated frequency. But even like consciousness it's becoming aware, right? And it's like we have to start questioning ourselves or our life. It's like, call yourself out on your bullshit. Can I say that?
Yes,
I can say that. Okay. I just think sometimes we just get so stuck and we have these lives and we're quite unhappy. And most people are waiting for that big holiday or that big thing to change it. And it's not. It's in the small things. And it's like reassessing ourselves and what we really want or what's true. A lot of people don't even know what their real true core values actually are, or their beliefs, their own ones. I'm not talking about what they kind of picked up as they grew up. And I would say taking responsibility for your mind is the first place to start. We keep referencing healing, but I also do want to talk about freeing up that space. Like the way that I've developed my gifts is I've dedicated this time to myself. And this time to myself is free from anything else. It's not ramming in more information from, another source. It is simply sitting with myself and allowing that internal kind of voice to speak. And to start with, it wasn't very clear. It was not clear at all. And I had to sort of take time to really just create the space so it could become clearer and clearer and clearer. I don't think people understand. I think people think that their mind just manages itself. It does not. It will manage you if you don't take care of it. And, our mind needs silence to heal and repair. And a lot of people have none. I know our lives are busy, aren't they, Greg? Yeah. And with kids. And I create this beautiful time in the morning. Like if you talk to very successful people, even Anthony Robbins, is it Tony? Anthony. They talk about giving yourself that hour of power. People in those positions, that are very successful, we talk to a lot of other people, they know that that day begins with them, and cultivating that space to get a gauge on where they're at and to take responsibility for like their emotional responses, all of these different things. But intuition's like a muscle. The more that I learn to step into it, the more that I even then trust it and I action. Like, have you ever had those times in life where you kind of go, I had that gut feeling. I knew I wasn't meant to hire that person. I knew I wasn't meant to do that, but I ignored it. Yeah.
And let my fear-based mind make the decision.
I know, but I think we're taking it too far. We are so overrun, and people are even on that point of exhaustion, and they just shut that feeling off and just push through. That in itself, like intuition and that higher aspect that we're talking about, your body's the gateway for that. So you're receiving signals all the time, and it's through like feelings that we will kind of be able to expand that, and it's a message that's trying to tell us stuff. So, if somebody was tired or exhausted, there is a lot of messages in there. Often there is physical body stuff as well that's happening, but it's almost like I'm getting a cue to listen to. The same as maybe something else that's telling me, no, that choice isn't right. And so it's kind of that journey to step into intuition. It's really about saying that I'm the authority in my life and I trust myself, and I'm actually going to listen to me and not this external, like, I don't know, like at the moment in the world, especially with internet, especially with how much information we're being shown and, seen, there's so many messages, but maybe those messages are not correct for me. So it's about really even starting to question those things and not buying into everything that I'm shown.
What is intuition? Like, link it to spiritual and soul stuff. What really is it? What is it that people need to truly understand to understand what intuition truly is?
It's like a voice that speaks to us. So if you could imagine what we see here now as the third dimension, there's actually like the fourth, fifth, sixth, like above. So what we see is only like 1/10. Can be hard because it's the unseen world to even trust does it exist. But believe me, energetic information wise, there's so much more. It would be like a computer and programs. It would be like all the coding that sits behind what you see. So everything has to be created in the spiritual or in these kind of realms before it shows up physically. So there's so much information that we don't see. It's like we're given a gauge on our life or a path, or our highest path and potential would exist in these places. And if we're brave enough and if we work out how to tune into it, we're given this information and we can use that information to create like our reality in front of us.
How do people know to trust their intuition? What if people are really intuitive or sensitive or hear things or feel things? How do they trust their intuition?
See, I see both sides of it because I've done it all for myself as well. And I've seen a lot of people that go into that spiritual kind of healing side and they do so much work on themselves. And to start with, it's really fun. And then it gets really unfun. And so even with intuition, people can almost develop it, but almost over energy. And then they read into like other people's information and it doesn't really serve them. So even if we're talking about someone that's done a lot of work, Greg, I'm not talking about kind of average people developing that. There is ways that you really need to be affirming yourself and kind of even energetic boundaries and things like that. But that would be a different topic. What do I do?
What do you do?
In the sense of, tell me, what was the question again about?
How do you tune in and trust your
Oh,
intuition?
how do I trust it?
How do you know, like you work with a lot of higher spiritual beings and entities, how do you decipher between your own truth and intuition and lies?
I have to say it was a massive process for me. At one point, this is years ago now, I've had people that would almost confirm things. So I would have all this information, I would channel, I would write, and I would then start to sometimes, because a lot of people do that, question themselves. And then I had people I would see, and I was always going to see them, and it was like I wanted them to confirm for me that it was true. And it was. And then it took me even longer to realize that was really a restriction in myself, not trusting myself. And I got to the point now where I just know, like I'm at that point where it's like I'm a medium and I have lots of things said to me. It is a little bit of a fine line, I will admit, with like if you have high intuition between sanity and insanity. I've walked those lines as well. But it was the fact of me just going, no, I do trust myself. And I have ways that I would do it. And for me, I found the best way to develop my intuition. I loved writing. Writing was a really clear way to almost shut my mind off. I remember at one point I've always sort of played around. That's how I've developed my intuition as well. But I remember at one point I was writing, and you can actually write from the place of your mind. And I wrote something and it was horrible. It was disgusting. It was fear-based. It was really so not even true, but that's what your mind will tell you. It wants to keep you safe. It will tell you all the things and why you shouldn't do this or that, or all the fear. And then it's a real skill to learn how to quieten your mind. So now I can almost shut my mind off, and I can channel and write from the place of, I guess people might call it their heart space, but it's like a higher place, a higher wisdom place. And the information that comes from that place is completely different. It is guidance. Like we teach a lot of our clients that, don't we, Greg? You even now do that. And you know when you're writing from the place of truth and when you're not. But once again, the way I developed it, I've dedicated more time to myself, and how many, 7, 8 years, like every morning without fail, that is my number one relationship. That is the number one place that I give time to hear what's right, to hear the truth, to follow that path. And I've always likened it to following breadcrumbs like Hansel and Gretel, that I've just found my way home to myself by almost trusting myself a bit more, finding another bit of information and stepping into it. But maybe you could talk about how you've found that path, because you were a big key, that ego kind of driven man just followed what he thought he should do, and all these programs that you carried that you didn't even realize weren't serving you. So for you, it was a progression to release them. And now I know you do a lot of intuitive kind of writing and stuff to yourself.
So my biggest challenge when I started doing this kind of healing work and just becoming more consciously aware of the truth and lies of my mind, which was pretty much what drove me into burnout 7 years ago. But I saw Tracey's journey, and I got frustrated that I didn't have the same abilities to hear things and tune in. And literally I would try and meditate, and I'd be trying to connect with something else, and it wasn't there, and I'd just get frustrated. So I guess the biggest lesson for me and the biggest lesson for everybody else is you need to understand, or you need to be able to learn through practice, what is your way of connecting. Like Tracey mentioned before, what are they? There's clear audio, there's clear cognizance.
You could feel stuff, so clear
feeling.
Sentient, you feel things. Clear cognizance, you just know things that like comes into your mind. You might hear stuff. You might kind of see information. So there's different ways. People have to get to know their connection.
So what I learned was I wasn't like Tracey. And when she shared her processes around how she did things and I couldn't do the same, I got frustrated. But I learned that I'm clear knowing, that if I actually clear the space and allow, I just know. It's like if I ask the right questions, I get the right answers. But the biggest thing I had to master was actually being patient, because I would typically be reactive off my mind. And if I asked a question, I instantly wanted the answer. So the places where I get the most connection and I can channel and write down the right information is when I'm actually doing work for other clients. I'm definitely in a channeling state when I'm doing that information. And it's kind of like when I'm working with the client, it's like the answers come through me and they're always 100% on point. So that's really powerful, but I need to be in that kind of deep, kind of intuitive, connected state with my client. And the other ways for me is if I go to the top of my mountain that I walk to in the morning and just free myself. So I just need to be really, really intentional around not having any distractions, not taking earphones when I go walking, don't listen to podcasts and all that sort of stuff. Just creating that space because yeah, it's clear knowing for me. And if I've created that space and I'm not writing from my mind, as Tracey said. I'm just writing through this intuitive knowing just comes out and it just kind of pours onto the paper. So
can I say two things? 100%. I find when I wanted to start tuning in, when I first started really kind of going into that intuitive space, that I set myself a time and it was the same time every day. And I wrote a big intention about what I was doing, that I was turning up to hear clearly. I don't know, it was something really beautiful. I wrote, it's almost like we have all these different guides to help and support us, and they will offer different guidance depending on what we need. And so it was like creating that space to say, I'm here and I'm listening. And it was clear. It's like my intention was clear on what I was doing. So it was almost like I created the space. It was easier to develop it because I was dedicating the space that when I turned up, that's the reason I was. And number two is our spiritual guidance, and that, well, our spiritual guidance can't tell us what to do because we have free will. So therefore, we have to direct our consciousness to what we want to create. So what I find often is people get caught up on what they're trying to create, and they might be asking a question, but they're asking the wrong question and they won't get a response. So they would need to reframe it into maybe like a better, it's like kind of asking better questions of myself. We've talked about that before. I get a better answer, because the spiritual won't answer if you haven't really kind of got it right. Like even when I do healing work for clients, I hear things, and if I haven't asked the right thing, nothing comes back to me and I have to re-ask it. So there's ways and times that you could dedicate to yourself to free up the space, like Greg said, to hear this kind of inner voice, but it would require dedication and space given to it. It would require not Netflix or your phone or those things. And I just think life is consumed at the moment with there's not as much room as there used to be in the past to have the space to cultivate that relationship, because it's a relationship.
So the biggest challenge that people have in this world is the pace of which we live in, and having smartphones and the information age and the speed of which things, everybody's got an addictive personality. Everybody's drawn into something. And if you're not, then you will already be able to listen into your intuition. If you are not kind of so attached to noise and information and cell phone or TV, or you use any other substance and so forth, this is where the disconnection comes from. So when we talk about ego versus intuition, it's like going to the gym and building a muscle. You can't go to the gym once and then expect to be in really good, healthy shape, right? You need to do it over and over and over and over. So the fastest way to develop a new habit, whether it's meditation, whether it's walking and going into nature and just having silent time, or whether it's intuitive writing or journaling to yourself, you actually have to remove the bad habit that's stopping you from doing it. And that would be nowadays the phone. The phone would probably be the number one biggest disconnector and probably the worst addiction that has hit humanity in our existence, because it just subliminally programs us. It gives us dopamine hits and it creates more disconnection in people than ever. And you're seeing it in children now. You're seeing it in kids with iPads. You're seeing it. It's creating the same dopamine and addictive response patterns to a drug addict. And you take this technology away from these children who are going through brain development, and they can lose their mind. They can get really angry and irritable and emotionally out of control. So as an adult, you've got 10, 20, 30 years of this kind of addictive dopamine chasing behavior. You have to break that first. Yeah. Because if you don't break that, you won't be able to create the space and you won't be able to listen to intuition, is because your mind will be so noisy and so overactive. So just in closing, I want to talk about a few of the tips and tools and processes that we use for it. So one, you need to create that silent space. And as Tracey said, if you make it the same time every day and make it a religious behavior that you do day in, day out, to give yourself silent space, even if you don't want to or not. It's like some days you don't want to go to the gym. You just need to keep doing it. And then writing. So writing down your intuitive thoughts and feelings is always the best way. Now, a lot of people think that might just be journaling. And a lot of people will use journaling to write a to-dos list, or they'll be thinking about what they need to get done today, or they'll be writing down their business goals and all that sort of stuff. So I just want Tracey to share with you the difference between journaling and intuitive writing, because there is a massive, massive difference. And you can go and write in your journal, but it might not be intuitive. It might just be coming from the ego, not from the intuition.
But both have its place, because our mind wants to keep us safe and it also wants to remind us. So I find journaling is a really good tool, that if I've got a lot on my mind and I keep replaying things, because that's what your mind will do. It doesn't want you to forget, because that's its job. So if you were to write things down, especially if you've had a busy work day, it's like you're saying to your mind, okay, you don't have to carry this anymore. I've written it down. I won't forget it. I can come back to it later. So they're even good habits. It's like there might be a process to journal from the mind to get rid of all the things that you're worried about or stressing about, so you can kind of give yourself space. It's like the same as if we went and talked to a friend and unburdened ourselves, or kind of got these things out of our system. But then the other place would be maybe to come back into your breath and your body, maybe close your eyes and kind of just rebalance your energy and just kind of get calm in yourself, and then come back to pen and paper and don't even think about what you're writing. I know, to me, when I first started doing this, really not that much came out, or it was a bit, I don't know, mumbo jumbo or whatever. So I kind of just kept doing it. And then as I just did it more and more, some of the messages are really beautiful, and you will know what is kind of just the day-to-day and fear-based things, and what is actually kind of a bit of a higher wisdom. But it's like you're offering that intuition a space to speak, because I bet you at the moment in your life there's not many spaces for it. And even that in itself is like setting an intention on creating that space and actually giving it room. So you would know, but you probably want to start by calming your mind by writing from the mind first and then going into that.
Beautiful. So we talk a lot about evolving, hence the Evolved CEO. We talk a lot about your mental, physical, and spiritual. We talk a lot about awakening. We talk a lot about the ego and the intuition. These processes, being able to quieten down the ego and remove some of the distractions that create so much noise and pressure and stimulation of the mind, and just starting to tap in intuitively. This is the journey to your spiritual awakening. This is the journey to your expansion. This is the journey to finding your passion and purpose. There is no shortcut. This just takes time and effort. It's also the journey to healing. If you want to heal your mind, give it silence. Yeah? Is there anything else you want to add? So thank you for tuning into this week's podcast around ego and intuition. This is so important, but it's also so hard if you've not got these practices in place, because it's going to take a lot of discipline and a lot of consistency and a lot of practice on a regular basis to start really, really tapping into your intuition. But we highly, highly encourage you to begin sooner rather than later, because the journey and what will transpire on the other side as you really start to identify and tune in with yourself is incredible. And this is actually our path. This is our journey. This is why we are here, to find our true selves. So thank you for tuning into another week's episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
See ya.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Evolved CEO podcast. If you value the information that is in our podcast, please like, subscribe, and add a review to our podcast page, because it'll help us understand the value that you are receiving, and more importantly, spread the word of this podcast. Also, share it with your friends and your family. Now, every listener of our podcast gets a free gift from us, and this is our 9 Pillars of Success, Love and Happiness life assessment. This is the exact same life assessment that our high-level clients, which are CEOs and business leaders, go through on an annual basis so that they can assess and reflect the past 12 months of their life and then plan their desired outcome for the next 12 months of their life. And this is our gift to you for listening in. So please follow the links below and you'll find the link to the assessment page. You'll also find Tracey and my social media links. We would love for you to connect with us on our social media channels, follow our additional content on there, as we want to provide as much value as we can in the event of helping you create more success, love and happiness in your life. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next episode.